Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this episode of my tutorial video channel. This is part 9 of interaction between demand and supply and equilibrium price and quantity. In part 7 and in part 8, I have discussed the impact on the market and the consequences, the economic consequences of lifting an import ban on automobiles in a country. What would happen economically? And in this part, I will discuss what would happen, that is, what will be the impact on the market and what will be the economic consequences when an export ban is lifted by the government of a country. Now, today's scenario goes like this. A country has a comparative advantage in producing one agricultural commodity, say for example sugar. As a result, cost of production of sugar in that country is low, so domestic price of sugar is low relative to the global price of sugar. Correct? Now, the government of that country has imposed a ban on export of sugar. Why that ban is imposed? To keep the domestic price low, because if the sellers or the producers are allowed to export sugar, then domestic supply would fall. As a result, domestic price would increase. So in order to keep the price level low, the government has imposed a ban on export of sugar. Now, banning export means losing foreign exchange. When a country has comparative advantage in producing one commodity, then certainly the country should go for exporting that commodity, because export means earnings of foreign exchange. So the government of that country, in this point of time, after a long time of export ban on sugar, the government is now deciding to lift that export ban. That is, the domestic producers and suppliers are free to sell in the global market. So what would be the consequences of this decision? Please look at the whiteboard. So scenario is export ban on sugar is imposed in a country was imposed in a country few years back. Now the government has lifted that ban. So what would be the impact? What would be the impact of domestic sugar market in that country, and what would be the economic consequences? Correct. So let us draw the diagrams to illustrate in details. On x-axis we measure quantity and on y-axis we measure price. Say this is the domestic market And here we draw the diagram for the global market. On x-axis, quantity is measured and price is measured on y-axis. This is global market. Say D sub D is the domestic demand curve and S sub D is the domestic supply curve. Let they intersect at point M. So the domestic price of sugar is say P sub D and the quantity is Q sub D. And in the global market, let D sub G is the global demand curve and S sub G is the global supply curve. Let they intersect at point N. So equilibrium price, the global equilibrium price is P sub G and global equilibrium quantity is Q sub G. Now this is the situation before lifting the export ban. That means here the export ban is in vogue because the domestic price is much lower than the export price. The domestic suppliers are not allowed to sell sugar abroad. Now in this situation, since the government is losing foreign exchange because by exporting foreign exchange could be earned, so the government is now deciding to lift that export ban. That is, the domestic suppliers and producers are now free to sell in the international market. As soon as that decision is implemented, the price, the domestic price will be P sub G, right? Now sellers are free to sell their product in any market, either in domestic market or in export market. That means in the global market. Since the price in global market is much more than the price in domestic market, so the sellers will be motivated to sell their products in the global market. Now, as soon as the sellers start selling the sugar in the global market, the same price in the global market will prevail in the domestic market. Why? Because sellers will not sell their product in domestic market below P sub G price, because by exporting that, by not selling in the domestic market, they could have earned P sub G price. So they will not sell in the domestic market below P sub G price. So as soon as the price increases from P sub D to P sub G, the domestic demand falls from Q sub D to Q sub D1. That means as price has increased, quantity demanded has fallen from Q sub D to Q sub D1. But at this price, sellers are motivated to sell more, right? Because by selling more, they will earn more profit because price has increased from P sub D to P sub G. Let this be Q sub S. That means the domestic producers are selling in the domestic market Q sub D1 this much, and They are exporting this much, right? The domestic demand is Q sub D1 because as price has increased, quantity demanded has fallen. But the reverse will happen in case of the producers or the sellers, because we know quantity supplied is directly related with price. That is, when price increases, quantity supplied increases, unlike quantity demanded. In case of quantity demanded, when price increases, quantity demanded falls, and when price falls, quantity demanded increases. But in case of supply, when price increases, supply increases, quantity supplied increases, and when price falls, quantity supplied falls. So in this case, price has increased, so quantity supplied will increase, and that has increased from Q sub D to Q sub S. So the producers are ready to produce and sell this much quantity, but there is not enough domestic buyers because domestic demand has reduced from Q sub D to Q sub D1. So this much the sellers are able to sell in the domestic market. So the rest, that means Q sub D1, Q sub S minus Q sub D1, Q sub S minus Q sub D1. This is export. This is the amount of export by that country. So what has happened? There was a ban on export of sugar in a country. The domestic price of sugar was much less related to the global price of sugar. The global price is P sub D, the domestic price is P sub D and the global price is P sub G. Since the country has comparative advantage in producing sugar, that's why the producers can sell sugar at a price lower than the global price. Correct? But losing the opportunity to export means losing foreign exchange. So the government has decided to lift the ban on export. The domestic producers are now free to sell their products anywhere in the world. As a result of this lifting of ban on export, the producers will be able to sell their product at the global price P sub G. This P sub G price will prevail in the domestic market because the sellers are free to sell all their products in the international market and sell nothing in the domestic market. That much liberty the sellers have. So if the sellers sell at all in the domestic market, they certainly will sell at this price, P sub G price. So the domestic price increases from P sub D to P sub G. As prices increased, quantity demanded has fallen from Q sub D to Q sub D1. But as prices increased, producers are motivated to supply more. They are ready to supply Q sub S this much. So the rest, that is Q sub S minus Q sub D1, is the amount of export. That much will be exported and this much will be sold in the domestic market. Now, what are the consequences of lifting this export ban on sugar? Number one, domestic price would increase, buyers will suffer as they will buy less at high price. Number 3, export of sugar would fetch foreign exchange for the country. Number 4, production will increase, so employment will rise. So these are the economic consequences of lifting the ban on export of sugar by this country. Correct? So far so good. So this is all about this video. That is what would happen in the economy, in the market, if the government lifts an old export ban on a commodity. Here this country has comparative advantage in producing sugar, so they can sell their products in the domestic market at a much lower price relative to the global price. But at the same time, since there is an export ban on sugar, the government is losing foreign currency, so the government decides to lift that export ban. And as soon as that export ban is lifted, the domestic price rises to the global price level and the domestic demand would fall. So the suppliers will sell their products in the global market. Domestic domestic demand will fall, so domestic supply will also fall, and much of their output will be sold in the global market. And these are the economic consequences. Number 1, domestic price would increase. Buyers will suffer as they will buy less at high price. Export of sugar would fetch foreign exchange for the country. Production will increase, and as production increases, employment would also increase. So these are the economic consequences. Okay. I hope you have understood this well. Still, should you have any doubt in your mind, if you have any query, if you have any particular question on this, please feel comfortable to let me know through the comment section. I shall be glad to respond to all your relevant queries. And if you think this video is useful for you, please do share the video with your friends, brothers, sisters and colleagues. And finally, thank you very much for watching this video. Stay well and goodbye.